Good evening, everybody. This is Monica Guzman coming to you live once again on a weekend. This particular weekend, I want to discuss some stuff that happened during the week tied into some research that I had already done. So, for this weekend, let me give you some backstory, or let me paint a picture. So, some of us, myself included, we monitored or we were monitoring what was happening in Italy February of last year. So, I personally hold the Italians and the Irish in high regard. I have a respect for their cultures. I also respect the French. Paris, particularly, has a special place in my heart. That's why when around 2015, when we were all watching just Paris become a slum, it was pretty heartbreaking for me anyway. Interestingly enough, we haven't heard a lot about all of the Muslim movement throughout Europe. And I mean, do you guys remember when Muslims were the greatest threat to America? That that definitely died off under the Trump administration, right? He definitely got a handle on all of that. Um, but we haven't really heard about the Muslim migration in Europe. So I wonder if any of that has calmed down thanks to the pandemic, or if the French managed to take care of that situation. But watching Paris become a slum, the same way America is becoming a slum, right? It was tough. So I particularly was paying attention to what was happening in Italy. February was a big month for me because as I saw all of this coming down the pipe, I started to prepare for the situation to make its way to America. It was just a matter of time, right? It was bound to come over this way too, and it did. So California went into lockdown the second week of March, but by then I had made several preparations. There were tons of stuff that we did. I was like, we're not going to be able to do this stuff pretty soon. Let's take care of a bunch of it right now. And we did. And that's just me being proactive. It's who I am. And so I I specifically was not impacted by the lockdowns. The lockdowns afforded me a lot of time to do more research and to read a lot more than I had been in the past. But I was more impacted by a asshole law that was passed in California, January 2020. And so as people impacted by that law made preparations, I also had to figure out what I was going to do. And it was that which provided me more time to read. So starting February 2020, I read books that I had heard about, but hadn't had the opportunity to get around to reading. I took advantage of a free Amazon service. I was like, fuck it. And it's free. So I took advantage of the Kindle 2-month membership for free. And I read, they have a lot of good books available if you sign up for the unlimited Kindle membership. That's free for 2 months. I don't know if that special's still running right now, but it was running last year. And I was like, I don't know what's going to happen. Let me take advantage of it. And so I will end up talking about or discussing most of the books that I read. Most of them were outstanding. One of them in particular was an eye-opener. Another one helped me fill in some gaps that I had been wondering about. But the one I want to talk to you about tonight is Stephen Covey's 9 Habits of Highly Successful People. Now, I am not going to discuss the 9 points. I am not going to discuss the merits of the book. I do think that it's worth reading if you have, in my opinion, we should all be reading more. Instead of playing video games and getting high, everybody should be using the time that you dedicate to those vices to reading. I specifically recommend that people read books written 100 years ago or more, because I'm encouraging people to understand this country, the shape of this country 100 years ago. What we're living in right now, and what I will be discussing over the weekend, is America stopped being America somewhere around right between the 1930s and the 1940s. Americans lost their country for sure in the 1960s. Let me remind you, 1962, 1963, 2 important court cases took place. One of them, brought forth by a Jewish man, removed prayer in public schools. Another, brought forth by an atheist man, removed Bible study from public schools. So that basically left a vacuum, right? We all know that kids today are being taught Globo Homo, they're being taught Aztec and Mayan rituals, they're being taught by Africans 1619 Project. So other stuff is filling these gaps. Now, it took 60 years. Well, so the Barack Obama administration helped usher in a lot of the 1619 stuff, right? It set the ground. So let's say it took them 50 years to truly roll out their agenda. And I watched, again, I'm coming at this from a professional sports perspective. I still love sports. I'm not watching anything with any regularity anymore. I'm not even catching like games every so often. I'm ready to roll out an alternative to professional sports. I'm just really done with the nonsense. But I still love sports. I've always had a thing for watching men physically compete at the highest level. But I don't want to watch engineered bots compete. I want to watch men who were born to execute specific skills. Maybe that's why, I mean, the 90s LA Dodgers were definitely a down decade. I mean, we tolerated them because, again, the Dodgers were able to ride the coattails of the team from the 80s. And so that spilled over into the 90s. It spilled over into the 2000s. And then obviously it's something that the current ownership has taken advantage of. And I believe it's really starting to fade now. Like, people just don't take Friedman's Dodgers very seriously, especially under the current situation with Trevor Bauer. But see, Trevor Bauer is in a way the straw that broke the camel's back. But there was a lead up to Trevor Bauer. There was Alex Verdugo, Julio Diaz, and Gabe Kapler. And the other guy that did get kicked off the AAA team, I don't know his name. So it led up to Trevor Bauer. It didn't start with Trevor Bauer. Andrew Friedman and his crew, Stan Kasten, Mark Walter, and the other guy helped usher this in. And so for a lot of people, just Trevor Bauer is the straw that broke the camel's obviously, that doesn't mean that it ends with Trevor Bauer. I personally believe that there are other degenerates wearing MLB uniforms right now, and it's just a matter of time before all that stuff comes up to the surface, especially because women are so empowered to talk and to report and to discuss amongst themselves. Okay, so another tangent of mine. So back to 9 Habits of Highly Effective People. Again, I'm not discussing the book. I am discussing a specific point that ties into a lot of what's happening right now. And it goes beyond, for me, it starts with MLB, but it spans or it stretches out into politics, namely it impacts those of us that identify on the right. We, in my opinion, on the right are leaderless. I know that Trump is trying to make a comeback. There was a poll that gave Trump a sizable lead ahead of DeSantis, which makes sense. Again, I know Trump. I follow Trump 15, maybe 20 years ago, or I'm getting to 20 years. I'm nearing 20 years. So again, the first book that I read post-college was The Art of the Deal. Once I got out of college, I was overreading. I couldn't. I was tired. I took some time out. I made it a point to not read. I was worn out. But the first I picked up was Trump's Art of the Deal. So I've always respected him, and I still respect him. I know there's a lot of people out there on the right who criticize Trump, but I'm actually a little bit skeptical of that criticism. I believe that some people on the right criticize Trump because you don't want him to take away from the momentum you think you're building up. You're threatened by Trump's popularity, and you should be, because Trump remains a very popular figure among several people who identify with the right. Okay, so when I read the book, Covey's, I hadn't taken a dive into American baseball history yet. I was on the cusp of discovering everything that I discovered about Ty Cobb, Cap Anson, Christy Mathewson, Walter Johnson, Honus Wagner, Cy Young. Just what was happening during these amazing pioneering years of these Americans who were born to play baseball. Now, I am never going to be able to claim that I have any expertise and knowledge of Babe Ruth. I think there are several New Yorkers out there who just not lived it, but they're so entrenched because they live in New York. They know way more than I do. The difference is that I am not going to allow Marxists in MLB to cancel Babe Ruth. There will never be a Babe Ruth again. There will never be a Babe Ruth 2.0, especially an import. Whoever replaces Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth had the most perfect baseball career a player could ever have. Additionally, Babe Ruth was studied by science because they tried to figure out how he accomplished everything he accomplished in American baseball. you're never going to get there. And I will, in August is when I'm really kicking things off, and that's when I'll really be getting into the nitty gritty of stuff. I'm going to make so many of you commies cry. I'm going to bathe and enjoy and bathing in your commie tears. Like, I am just so looking forward to you guys crying, because I will be defending Cap Anson. I will be defending Ty Cobb, and I'm going to enjoy your beta tantrums. Like, you don't even know how much fuel that provides, and I welcome it. But okay. So the point I'm sorry, just like cry bitches. 7 habits of highly effective people. I was working on a different project, and it was nine, so I've had 9 in my mind. But I have my notes now, so I've corrected myself. So right off the bat, the book begins with a comparison and contrast, kind of. Covey talks about personality and character ethics. Now, toward the end of the book, throughout the book, he talks about his faith in God. But toward the end of the book, he mentions Judeo-Christian values, which is nonsense. Judeo-Christian values is a term that was developed early in the 1800s, and I believe that it came out of the critical theory crowd. So anybody who tries to sell you on Judeo-Christian values is never going to allow you to go back to Christian America. You are just going to be led like a dog by the nose. You're going to end up chasing your tail again, which is what the American right continually does since, again, I'm going to say since the 1960s through the present. And that's the biggest problem with the American right, that because so many alphas were killed or damaged from World War I and World War II, Americans lost their alphas. So you lost your gatekeepers. And what's left over is majority beta males who play video games, who smoke pot, who participate in vices, who worship at the altar of professional sports, of just other stuff, right? Gambling, things that aren't good for you. Things that put you on the couch several hours a day, weaken your immune system, weaken you physically, weaken your brain, while China and Russia are pushing their males to get physically fit, mentally fit, spiritually fit. So, and it's by design. It is definitely by design. And it's not just China and Russia. It is the Judeos residing on American soil. It is Africans residing on American soil. They all want American males to be fat, to wear glasses, to be stupid, to be bald. Like, what is going on with baldness? I mean, like the nerds, right? The nerds that look like the memes with the glasses and the beard and they're bald. Like, what's going on with the baldness? Like, is that diet related? Is that bad genes? Is that smoking pot? Like, I have another theory on baldness too, though. Again, I don't know a lot about Judeos, about their characteristics and their traits, but I'm starting to wonder if baldness is a Jewish thing, just like the nose is a Jewish thing. Um, and then I'm wondering about the curly hair too, if that's a Jewish trait. I wonder if baldness is a Jewish trait too. And we that because Jewish people involved in MLB, for example, are all either short, bald, they're just not physically I mean, Jewish have never been physically fit the way Americans are, right? Lou Gehrig died at 37 because he had bad genes. There are no Jewish baseball stars. I mean, you got some that are had did okay, but they're definitely not Babe Ruth, Walter Johnson, Honus Wagner, Christy Mathewson, Cy Young, Ty Cobb. They are weak, physically weak. That is a trait that I've noticed among the Jewish community, especially the Jews in the front offices of MLB. And so they are impaired by this, by the fact that they can't compete physically. And I noticed, so everything's tied in together. I will be separating these things out, but right now that I'm just laying down this groundwork, by me doing these live streams, what I'm doing is I'm trying to figure out what pieces of information I'm missing. People's names that I can't remember, that I don't know, I'm like, okay, I need to make sure to fill in these blanks. So let me reel myself back. But the Jews cannot compete on a physical level. That's why they did what they did to the economy and other stuff, which I am going to cover a little bit. If I don't cover it today, I'm going to cover it tomorrow. Okay. So Covey, I'm borrowing this point that he makes because Jews have a history of borrowing from other people. Karl Marx may have been anti-Semitic, but that didn't stop them from taking his ideology and his philosophies and building upon them. Hitler may have been anti-Semitic, but that didn't stop the Jews from taking a page out of the propaganda book that was used by his sidekick, Goebbels. What's the other one that they took? There's another one that they took. So I'm turning the tables and I'm taking something from them. And I'm taking this personality versus character ethic. So Covey defines the character ethic as integrity, humility, fidelity, temperance, courage, justice, patience, industry, simplicity, modesty, and abides by the golden rule. The character ethic, he believes, came into the forefront after World War One. After World War One, so Americans, I'm going to separate this as the character ethic was your American, and then the personality ethic was ushered in by the Jews. So success, function of personality, public image, attitudes, behaviors, skills for human interaction. So human and public relations techniques, positive mental attitude. So PR is a field that was also developed by another Jew in the early 1900s on American. So when I first read this February of last year, I I read it, it caught my attention, but I couldn't flesh it out. I asked myself, okay, what happened exactly post World War One that caused this shift from character ethic to personality ethic? So personality ethic is everything in Hollywood today, professional sports today, anything that gets sold through PR. Uh, I mean, advertisement, marketing, all that stuff falls into personality ethic, but it's more prominent in Hollywood, music, and professional sports. And so again, my I argue that Americans lost America from in between 1930 and 1940. So this now makes sense to me, given all the research and reading that I've done on American baseball history and just other stuff that I've been able to piece together from the 1860s through about the Babe Ruth era. And why is this important? And it's very important to the American right too. So Nick Fuentes goes from getting put on the no-fly list, and now he's banned from Twitter. Now, if you know how things are developing right now, him getting banned for Twitter was obvious. It was going to happen. So every time somebody from the right gets banned from Twitter, there's an uproar, but then people move on for it. Even myself, it's, I mean, Twitter is, sorry, okay. Does Twitter have the right to ban people or not? I mean, that debate keeps raging on, and I don't see it ending well on any level. Because do you want to start regulating this monster, or do we take the easier route of stop depending so much on it? Basically, hang on. I got something happening over here. Okay. Um, so I argue that the reason why big tech censors Americans is because big tech is not Americans. So the first bubble, I didn't live it. I graduated into the first bubble of 2000s, the early 2000s. I graduated into the implosion. So 2008, on the other hand, I can look back now because I was around it, even though I didn't know I was around it. So if you think back, I recommend watching the Zuckerberg movie, Kevin Spacey. It's a good movie to give you a little bit of background on what was going on. Now, I lived what was happening without knowing it at the time. So now that I look back on those experiences, I realize I can compare it to, I can see how one thing led to today. So Zuckerberg isn't an American. Zuckerberg helped usher in social media on a high level. So I remember MySpace and I remember Friendster, but it was Zuckerberg who took it to another level. If the movie is accurate, Zuckerberg aimed to get people like you to hand over your personal information voluntarily. So I've worked around tech fields, and when I first walked into it, something that was happening in those years is there was a big push to build databases. And so it's just, I'm trying to figure out how much to tell without giving it all away. Not because, I mean, eventually I will piece everything together for you guys, but it's more of, I want to keep things organized. So freelancing isn't for everybody. And people who should not be anywhere near freelancing have gotten into freelancing and have ruined a lot of freelancing for other people. Freelancing, when you freelance, you cannot expect benefits. You're a Nimrod. If you go into freelancing, you need to understand that you pay for everything out of your own pocket. There are no benefits. You have no employer. So freelancers are used as a tool to build databases. And those databases are meant to automate functions to replace humans. I worked on several projects that revolve around that. And the first time I was like, okay, well, whatever. And then the second time it was more of a surprise. And then by the third time that I got involved in another project, I was like, okay, this is what they do. So whatever, no big deal. For me, it wasn't a big deal at that point anymore because I understood what they're doing. And it is what it is. What they do is they pay handsomely in the beginning, and then some people end up getting replaced by software algorithms and whatnot. So right now, what happened with is it? It's not Uber. It's the other one. So some of these companies, these rideshare companies, what they're doing right now is they're testing. They want self-driving cars, right? And so they are using humans as the subjects to help them build a database to roll out, if it's going to be possible, the self-driving car technology. So so let me just take myself back. I'll go into more details later on. Again, I am not covering topics that I am not familiar with. It's pretty amazing how much I've experienced, and it's pretty amazing to me how much of all those experiences are relevant to what's happening today. Um, and it's so weird and it's so cliche to say everything that I've been through was supposed to happen. I'm not trying to take away from God's creations and God's plan, but it's super, super insane. And it's a little scary because, again, so I was introduced to the bell curve as a teenager, and at that time, to realize the things that the bell curve revealed at that point in my life was just not overwhelming, but it was definitely shocking. And so it's all relevant, and I will end up covering a lot of it over the next several months. But eventually, I'm going to move on to the next phase of what I'm working on. So we'll see how much I get through from now till then. Okay, so let's go back to this personality versus character ethic. So Americans fell under the character ethic, and then Jews ushered in what we have today, which is led by the personality ethic. Who falls into the personality ethic category? Patrick Mahomes, Mookie Betts, Steph Curry. Who are some other popular ones? Mike Trout, Albert Pujols. Basically, several of the MLB players voted into the Hall of Fame in the 2000s. And then, so there's a lot of second tier MLB players that they're trying to push forward with the personality ethics strategy, and they're failing miserably at, because again, MLB is built on narratives. There are no stars anymore. I mean, I still hold Madison Bumgarner, Zach Greinke, and DJ LeMahieu in high regard, but there's an obvious effort to erase them. DJ LeMahieu's still working on his batting average. I think he finished today with like 272 or something. Zach Greinke is only being allowed to pitch like 4 innings a game every 6th day. I don't know if the Astros ended up going to a 6-man rotation or not. And then I don't know what's going on with Mad Bum. Like, is he injured or something? I haven't had the opportunity to look it up. But when I checked, I haven't seen Mad Bum pitched in several weeks, it feels like. So there's just an effort to the last remaining baseball players, just to get rid of them, because MLB wants to. Oh, Tatis is another one. Acuna is another one. Alves is another one. And if you notice the trend, these are all Dominicans, Puerto Ricans, and Africans. Goodbye to the American baseball player. He's basically, as far as MLB is concerned, is gone. And then the white players that are still there, like your Walker Buehlers. Walker Buehler went to Vanderbilt, which the MLB director of, which is basically African relations, had a conversation with the baseball people at Vanderbilt, and I'm assuming it's because he's pressuring them to go in a more African direction, because they have so much technology at Vanderbilt, so they're engineering baseball bots too. And then, so you've got your Walker Buehlers, who, if he wasn't a baseball player, probably would have joined Antifa. And then you've got your Adam Wainwrights, who are cheaters, but they're trying to cover themselves up under the cloak of charity, which falls again into the personality ethic. So you've got Adam Wainwright, who cheated, trying to make up for that by being a charitable person. That goes for other people too. And you know, it's failing because Americans don't care about MLB anymore anyway, so whatever. And we're gonna come up with our alternative, so it is what it is. So earlier I was talking about, before I went on my real tangent, I was talking about big tech censors Americans because big tech isn't American. Zuckerberg is the one who really ushered in social media. And because Zuckerberg has no roots in America, he's not tied to American history. It's easy for him to censor Americans. It's easy for him to kick Trump off the platform because it's important. It's really important for me to continually emphasize the fact that big tech isn't American, which is why they censor Americans on American soil. America isn't run by Americans anymore. That's why a Nick Fuentes gets put on the no-fly list. That's why Nick Fuentes, apparently his bank accounts got closed. Something happened with his finances. And then obviously now he's banned off Twitter. So something that does concern me with the American right is this push to live systems that weren't built by Americans, and they weren't built for Americans either. So Andrew Torba from Gab got kicked off another bank, or had another bank account shut down. So Andrew Torba, from my understanding, is an intelligent funding Gab through alternative means. So why hasn't he been able to come up with an alternative banking solution? The system doesn't want you. As an American, corporations don't want you, banks don't want you, professional sports doesn't want you, Hollywood doesn't want you, because you didn't build the current versions of these entities. So Hollywood, again, there's overrepresentation now of Africans in Hollywood, and they're going to take the financial hit eventually, or they're going to live in denial for a long time until they just. So corporations, Hollywood hasn't gone bankrupt yet because our tax dollars fund them, but eventually that well is going to dry up. They can only print money for so long before the dollar becomes completely worthless, and you better be prepared for that moment because it's coming. Again, we've got to be ready with the alternatives, and bartering is the best alternative. They're not going to be able to barter tax. They're not going to be able to tax bartering, and that's how you really start choking them, where you choke them off. You got to choke off the supply, basically. So again, you're not allowed. The reason why Americans are having their bank account shut down, getting put on no-fly lists, getting kicked out of corporate jobs is because, I mean, Coca-Cola, its first sponsor or partner in advertising was Ty Cobb, right? Because Ty Cobb is from Georgia. Coca-Cola was developed in Georgia. So Coca-Cola has an American history attached to its brand. But Coca-Cola is obviously not run by Americans anymore. It's been taken over by non-American entities who are going to use the company in some shape or form to come after Americans. And you have to just accept it. Accept that these entities are no longer run by Americans, and they're not for Americans either. And it's fine. Do you really need to be chugging Coca-Cola products? And I know they have water and other stuff, but anything that's sugar-based, you don't need to consume it anyway. Nabisco's another one, right? Is Nabisco Oreos, Chips Ahoy and all that? You don't need to be consuming that stuff anyway. If they want to go around waving their rainbow flags, fine. You don't need to consume them anyways. Do you need to be eating at fast food chains? No, you don't. So these corporations and entities that are anti-American, you don't need them anyway. And it goes beyond boycotting. You don't need to boycott them. You just need to stop funding them completely. Let them go out of business. And then when they go out of business, don't revive them. You don't need these things in your life. They popped up after the takeover, basically. So when I talk about the takeover, how did it happen? I looked up I looked up a couple of numbers as I was preparing for tonight. 4.8 million Americans served in World War One. Almost 3 million of those Americans were drafted. Okay, why is that important? Because even though almost 3 million American men were drafted to serve in World War One, it's not like today where the bravest and brightest among us volunteer to join the military. They were drafted. So what I'm trying to say is, even though 3 million were drafted, those men, the majority of them had a higher IQ than the Americans of today. How do I know this? Because they weren't smoking pot back then. They weren't playing video games back then. They weren't sitting on their junk all day, damaging their sperm. They were reading. American young men used to read for fun. Stefan Molyneux's video, if it's still up there, on postmodernism, he talks to a dude whose parents were Marxists. And they specifically lived the agenda. So they were among people who with Americans, and their purpose was to spread the agenda. And in that, he talked about his grandfather who used to work a 40-hour blue-collar week, but in his spare time, he used to read. And keep in mind that these men are also your men who would work their 8-hour days, go to a bar, have a drink, and then go home and have dinner. So even though these men were drinking, they were more intelligent than the majority of American males today because they were reading. They were reading the classics. So they were feeding their brain. They were working monotonous jobs that a lot of you out there consider boring, but they were in better health than the men of today are, namely the American men of today. Again, they weren't playing video games, they weren't smoking pot, they drank, but they worked their 40-hour weeks, they had income in their pocket, they owned homes, they were married, they had kids, they were in a better, their health was a lot better than the majority of American men today. And they read the classics. And so they were feeding their brain at the same time. They weren't worshiping at the altar of sports gambling. They weren't worshiping at the altar of other vices. And so one of my goals is to help American young men get back to a healthy state. Because if you don't, other cultures will, and they will overrun you, and there will be not that much to be done by Americans. Now, I know there's people out there who are talking about, well, it took such and such country 100 years to achieve independence. And I've heard other people state this, and that's fine, but no other system comes to the American system. So in order to repair and restart America, we have to do what the founding fathers did. We have to turn back the clock all the way back to them. We have to commit to the founding documents, the founding principles. That's our platform. This continuous effort to centralize leadership is not the correct route. It will blow up in your face. It will always lead back. I mean, the Tea Party movement sunk. The MAGA movement, it's not quite dead because we still have Trump, but there are people from within trying to put it in a grave. And so other movements that are trying to get off the ground out there will fail too, because it always devolves into a power grab. There's always somebody who isn't honest and is just doing it because they were a nerd in high school and they've got a grudge against the popular kids. And these are your people who turned out to be authoritarians and want to end the push of guys and be take their anger out on women. So the best thing that I will encourage people to do, and I will be actually carrying this out in a few months, is keep things local. I am still impressed by Scott Pressler. He's posting videos up of the work that he's doing in South Carolina. He's one guy who goes to these group gatherings to help people register new voters, to help people run for office. So that strategy works because he's just helping them register voters. It doesn't make sense for somebody in Florida to tell somebody in Washington how to vote. They need to figure it out on their own. Every district needs to figure this stuff out on their own, because what's important in Florida isn't going to be what's important in Washington. Every household has its own set of problems. So Scott Pressler has the best idea right now. Every community, every district needs to figure out what their current problems are, and they need to figure out how to fix them within themselves. That's how we trickle up to the state level, to the congressional level, to the executive branch level eventually. I mean, I think we could do away with a couple of judicial districts. And then even congressional districts, right? California is losing 2 House members, which is great. We don't need that much bureaucracy. So tomorrow I will dive a little bit deeper into this stuff. And so my main points for this weekend are: we are being led by the personality ethic. And the personality ethic is an empty one. These are people who don't bring anything to the table except their narrative, public relations, marketing, advertising. They're just a shell that's being sold. Whereas the character ethic is your American, is your Babe Ruth, your Cy Young, your Ty Cobb, your Honus Wagner, Walter Johnson, Christy Mathewson. These were men of substance. And that's really the big difference between what was happening in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and what's happening right now. And it goes beyond that. So Patrick Mahomes, again, I did not watch the Super Bowl, last year's Super Bowl. I didn't watch it, but I heard that Jimmy Garoppolo made this horrible throw, and that's what allowed Patrick Mahomes to pick up the game and win. So I was already skeptical of that win in Patrick Mahomes' column because I know that Patrick Mahomes is just a narrative. But I couldn't voice that assumption because I didn't have evidence. Now with Tom Brady crushing Patrick Mahomes, and then the game that I watched between Patrick Mahomes and the other kid, that was the most awful football game I've ever seen in my life. Again, so I watched all of Tom Brady's postseason games this last NFL season, and all of those games were amazing, especially the game against Aaron Rodgers and the game against Drew Brees. That I felt was professional football at its best. I mean, had been a while since I watched professional football, but I knew that New Orleans defense has always been insane, and I knew that was going to be a big hurdle for Tom Brady's team to get over, and they did. It was amazing what they were able to do. So I actually feel that Tom Brady's team could have tackled down Patrick Mahomes way more in the first quarter. I felt that they were giving him an opportunity to breathe. And I understand. I mean, Tom Brady wins his games in the second half. So, but I definitely was like, dude, he's right there. Just tackle him already. So based on what I saw this last NFL postseason, I am very much sure that what Jimmy Garoppolo did in the previous Super Bowl was on purpose. He threw the game on purpose so that Patrick Mahomes could pick up a win, so that the Patrick Mahomes narrative could stay alive. I mean, they call him a champion, but he's really just an engineered narrative. Okay, so why is the fact that Patrick Mahomes lives in the personality ethic, why is that important to understand? Because Patrick Mahomes is pushed out in front of the media as a talking figure or talking head, right? So I haven't watched the videos of the Olympian who chose to smoke pot. Basically, she chose to poison her body, even though she was days away from making it to the Olympics, which is the highest honor for an amateur athlete. She chose to poison her body with drugs. Now, I haven't watched the videos, but from the captions that I've read, I respect the fact that she takes responsibility for the consequences that came with her choices. I think that is outstanding especially for an African to do. But what's happening now? Patrick Mahomes is pushed out in front of the media to act like he's upset, and this narrative is basically pushing for amateur athletes to be able to poison their bodies and smoke pot. So what does that do? That lowers the IQ, that lowers the professionalism of amateur athletes down to the African level. Again, this mixing with Africans isn't going to, what's happening right now isn't about leveling up. They're not encouraging people to mate with Asians, right? Because mating with an Asian gives you an opportunity to raise the IQ. If you mate with an African, you are going to produce children with IQs lower than yours if you're not African, right? The IQ is going to go down as opposed to up. So when we start accepting that our Olympic bound athletes can smoke pot and poison their bodies, we're lowering the IQ, we're lowering the standard. We're in African territory. We're in Jamaican territory of an IQ of 71 as opposed to the American IQ of 98. Americans don't do this stuff. But because America isn't run by Americans, it's run by people who don't give a shit about you. They don't care if you burn your brain cells with pot. They don't care if you damage your sperm's DNA with video games, junk food, whatever else you guys are doing. They don't care if you fall into the addiction of sports gambling. You are not related to each other by blood. So they have no responsibility to the consequences of the choices that you make. Or just walking into vices. They don't give a shit about you. You need to I'm going to keep repeating that in different ways so that it sinks in for more people, and hopefully you guys will take it to your communities and help the people that you love get off pot, get off the video games, get off the vices, find God. And that's how we raise the IQ. That's how we restart America. Because you know, I don't know where all of this is going to lead me. I don't know what God has in store for me. I don't know how long God intends to keep me alive. We know that shit happens out there. The streets are getting crazy. So I don't know how long God intends to keep me alive. But as long as I'm still alive, I believe that this weird path that I've taken, I have battled against being a leader for several years. I didn't want the spotlight. The responsibility I could handle, but because I'm a female, I know that it's not supposed to be women leading men. But because American men are majority betas, there are no men doing this right now. There are some, but I believe that a lot of you are ineffective. And maybe these are lessons that you need to learn on your own. But it's very difficult to just sit there and watch it happen. And I guess maybe that's because I have skin in the game in this, because I have a child. And whatever happens, I hope that he gets a little bit of the America that I grew up in. So I have a stake in helping this country. Steve Bannon talked about it. I guess there's some city in Texas that he called them Hispanics. So the Hispanics in that Democrat-run area are starting to wake up, and it's freaking out the Democrats. And so I've always identified with the right. I had experience in college. Again, it was near election time, and I turned in my registration, and the organization that took it looked at it and said, Republican, how did that happen? So the expectation at college was that we were all going to register Democrat. And so I can tell you, I have a lot of experiences under my belt that are relevant to everything that's happening. And I'm talking about stuff that I'm not making suggestions, and I'm not talking things that I'm pulling out of thin air like other people do. I am in the character ethic. I have substance behind me. And we'll see how far I get with all of this. But as long as I'm still alive, as long as God decides alive, this is the path that I have, that I'm supposed to be on. And if that makes a couple of commies cry, so be it. I love it. Um, so again, tomorrow I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into all of this. I'm going to bring in examples to help you understand the character ethic versus the personality ethic and how it impacts the American right. My big message for tonight is big tech censors Americans because big tech is not American. And on top of that, the current system wasn't built by Americans. As soon as GDP was introduced on American soil, the economy stopped being the economy of Americans. And then obviously it got accelerated when the dollar was taken off the gold standard. The fact that Americans lost so many potential alphas during World War I and World War II basically eliminated the majority of your gatekeepers. And the people who would have been passing on traditions passed away, or they came back damaged from everything that they saw. So I'm going to expand on all of this tomorrow and bring in a couple more details and definitely use MLB as the bulk of the examples. So I hope everybody has a wonderful Sunday. I will see you back here tomorrow, 9 o'clock. Next weekend, I will be talking about Ty Cobb, and I will be discussing a couple of points that come from War on the Base Paths, which seems to be a good not biased biography on one of the greatest American baseball pioneers. And, you know, Ty Cobb was loved. Maybe he was a little rough. Well, obviously he was rough around the edges. But Ty Cobb wasn't attacked until after he passed away. So cowards waited for him to die off. So by Marxists in MLB attacking this man post his death gives the rest of us the go ahead on going after their stars, like Hank Aaron after they died. Hank Aaron was just a compiler. Nothing special about Hank Aaron, nothing special about Jackie Robinson, couple of others. But again, the majority of that I'm going to cover. I will show you why I can back up that opinion in August. So tomorrow night, I will expand on personality versus character ethic. Big tech is an American. That's why it censors Americans. And it's time to stop trying to live in systems that were not built by Americans, and they're definitely not built for Americans. And I think that'll help give people who identify with the right a better path forward. Scott Presler is doing an amazing job with the work that he's doing registering voters. I think he has he's getting the most done. And then there are communities who are fighting back, and the majority of those communities are rural, including here in California. It's rural California that managed to get a recall election scheduled, which is pretty amazing. So again, I will see you guys back here tomorrow night, 9 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. I hope you have a wonderful Sunday. Thank you for watching.